When we talk about the rise of American wealth, we usually hear a very clean story. It's a story of hard work, innovation, free markets, and that rugged frontier spirit. We hear about factories, railroads, and visionary entrepreneurs who built prosperity from scratch. And while parts of that story are true, it leaves out a deeply uncomfortable piece of the puzzle. Because some of the earliest flows of American capital didn't come from industry or invention. They came from trade routes that most history books just rush right past. One of them ran straight through China, and it was fueled by opium. This story isn't about blaming the present for the past. It's about understanding how money really moved when global power was first being built. And why moral clarity often disappears when profits get large enough. In the late 18th and early 19th centuries, China was the world's manufacturing superpower. It produced silk, porcelain, and tea on a scale no Western nation could even dream of matching. Europe and the young United States desperately wanted these goods. But there was one huge problem. China didn't really want anything from the West in return. Chinese merchants demanded one thing: silver. So silver flowed east, and Western treasuries started to drain. Governments began to panic. Now, the British solution to this problem is pretty well known. They forced opium grown in India into China to reverse the flow of silver. But what's often forgotten is that American merchants quickly followed the exact same path. Quietly, efficiently, and very, very profitably. Early American traders didn't have colonies in Asia like the British did. What they had was flexibility. After gaining independence, the United States was desperate for capital. It needed trade networks. It needed hard currency. And China represented an opportunity on a scale that few other places could offer. So American ships began arriving in Canton, the main port for foreign trade. Carrying opium they sourced from the Ottoman Empire and later from India. Technically, this trade was illegal under Chinese law. But enforcement was weak, corruption was everywhere, and the profits were absolutely enormous. This wasn't some fringe activity carried out by a few rogue traders. This was mainstream commerce. Prominent American merchant families built their fortunes on this trade. Shipping firms expanded. Insurance companies grew. Banks financed the voyages. Entire ecosystems of capital began to form around moving a product that was officially condemned but unofficially tolerated because it was so lucrative, and that money didn't stay at sea. It flowed back into American ports. Into banks, into factories, into railroads, and even into the foundations of universities and institutions that would later become symbols of American respectability. What makes this history so difficult isn't just the trade itself. It's how completely normalized it became. Opium wasn't treated as a moral question. It was treated as a financial instrument. The logic was brutally simple. China wanted silver, the West wanted Chinese goods, and opium solved the equation. The human cost certainly existed, but it was distant, it was abstract, and most importantly, it was inconvenient to think about. When Chinese authorities finally tried to stop the trade for good, the response wasn't negotiation. It was force. The Opium Wars are usually framed as a story of British aggression. But American interests benefited immensely and indirectly from the outcome. The forced opening of Chinese ports, the weakening of the Qing dynasty's authority, and the rewriting of trade rules all made global commerce much easier for Western powers, including the United States. This moment marked something much larger than just trade. It marked a shift toward a world where financial leverage mattered more than national sovereignty. A world where economic pressure could achieve what armies once did, and where morality quietly bent around the numbers on a balance sheet. For America, the opium era coincided with its transformation from a former colony into an emerging commercial power. Capital accumulation accelerated. Shipping networks expanded across the globe. Financial institutions matured. The country was learning how to operate inside global systems that rewarded speed, a high tolerance for risk, and a certain moral distance. Now, this doesn't mean American wealth was built only on opium, of course it wasn't. But it does mean the early system wasn't clean. And that matters, because the myths we tell ourselves shape our behavior. When a society believes its success came from pure virtue alone, it stops questioning the systems that generate wealth today. It forgets that power often grows in the gray zones, those places where legality, morality, and profit don't align neatly. The deeper lesson of the opium trade isn't really about drugs. It's about incentives. When markets reward outcomes without accounting for the consequences, people follow the incentives. Governments look away. Institutions rationalize their involvement. And entire economies can normalize harm as long as it remains profitable and happens far away. This pattern didn't end in the 19th century. It repeats itself whenever demand meets imbalance. Whenever one side controls the capital and the other side bears the cost. Whenever profit is detached from responsibility. Understanding this history doesn't weaken the idea of American success. It strengthens it. Because mature, resilient financial systems aren't built on comforting stories, they're built on honest ones. The opium trade reminds us that wealth is rarely born innocent. It often emerges from conflict, from asymmetry, and from power. Only later does it wrap itself in the cloak of legitimacy. By the time the United States entered the industrial age in full force, the foundations were already laid. Capital had been accumulated, networks were established, institutions were funded. The machine was already running. And most people never thought to ask how it got started. History doesn't exist to shame the present. It exists to explain it. When we study the darker chapters of global finance, we don't do it to tear down systems. We do it to understand how they really work so we can recognize similar patterns when they appear again. Because money doesn't remember morality. It only remembers flow. This is Legacy of Money, where history reveals what the balance sheets never show. Thanks for watching, and if you found this perspective valuable, consider subscribing for more.